All right, the president will be holding a cabinet meeting at Camp David. That's where he is this weekend, 2 p.m. Eastern time. No doubt hurricane relief will be on the schedule. Remember, he's got a number of issues to deal with here, including sweeping aid and who's affected in each and every state. And not only Irma, but Jose coming around the pike here, Category 4 storm. A lot on his proverbial plate. Former FEMA Director Michael Brown, who last time was with me, was giving the president high marks for how he was juggling all of the above. How's he doing, Michael? Good to see you, by the way.
Good to see you, Neil. I got to tell you, I'm not only jealous, but I'm actually excited about seeing this response. This is a textbook example of federalism and how state and local governments should do what they should do. I've heard Governor Scott talk about having evacuation zones. So you're not trying to move 7, 8, 9 million people out at once. You're trying to move people out methodically from the most dangerous place first, and then the second, third, and fourth place. He didn't impose the contraflow on I-95 until they were able to move supplies into the affected areas, and now contraflow is opened. You've heard him about talking about...
we should explain, you're an encyclopedia,
yes.
But contraflow is when, obviously, to allow people to leave a state can go in lanes that normally would be gone the other way. But you're right, he saved that
That's right.
for emergency relief, gas supplies, food getting in.
Right, and then turn that on. Right. And then you hear Governor Scott talking about today that they're using public transportation. They're using buses and other things for people who may not have been able to get out, or for whatever, bizarre reason decided not to get out, but now have had a change of heart. So we're seeing a classic example of state and local government leadership doing what they are supposed to do in these impending storms, and FEMA being not the first responder, but being those that can come in and help supplement state and local government. I got to tell you, this is, put aside for a moment the severity of the storm. You guys will talk about that all day long, and I think that's appropriate. But take one moment and realize that here is government at all levels, state, local, and federal, doing what we expect them to do and doing it in the proper roles. I just want to stand up and yell hallelujah to Governor Scott and to Brock Long for doing this in the textbook manner that we expect them to do it.
You know what I've noticed, and you're closer to the response and analyzing it than I'll ever be, but from the president on down, there does seem to be an aversion to finger pointing, even when a knee-jerk reaction might seem mistaken, or you might have people second-guessing, well, the storm was going to be on the East Coast, now it's on the West Coast. Who botched that? There's none of that. There's an appreciation
right.
for the unpredictable nature of natural disasters, or potential or otherwise, and just pivoting to the reality of the moment, and then get to the second guessing later. Very little of that, and I think that whether you're Republican, a Democrat, conservative, or liberal, is a big sweeping change.
And I think that sweeping change is, people have learned from Katrina. You do all of the finger pointing when the storm's happening. That takes away from the response. So if you cut that kind of stuff out
right.
and actually do your job and actually be a mayor, actually be a governor, and do what you're supposed to do, that enables the federal government to then marshal their resources, so when they're called upon, they can come in and they're not trying to pick up or clean up the mess that state and local governments left. So once again, as the guy that, that took all of this stuff during Hurricane Katrina, I just really want to stand up and give a standing ovation to Governor Scott and to Brock Long and to President Trump and say, you guys are doing this exactly the right way, and thank you as an American citizen.
Good for you. You know what I noticed, too, and I think it's always helpful if you can avoid the finger pointing, is when you can see cooperation amidst parties, and maybe there's something in the water right now. We're seeing a lot more of that. And I know there are people who will be cynical about it. I understand Washington works and the view of that. But one of the things that you were in the middle of, I distinctly remember in Katrina, is you had, a Democratic mayor and Democratic governors rivaling for attention with Republican governors and a Republican president, and it's a whole mishmash. Yet in the case of Florida, where I've been speaking with Democratic mayors and Republican mayors, a Republican governor and neighboring Democratic governors, everyone seems to be on the same page. The party label matters little. Saving people matters more. I think that's a refreshing and should be an obvious approach, but it's very real.
I think that is an incredible insight, and I think that people need to recognize that. And let me add one little bit of nuance to that. irrespective of the parties, they're doing their jobs. So the mayors, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And I think that's why with my background, sitting here watching this, I just want to say to all governors and all mayors across the country, watch this, pay attention. This is how you do it.
Yeah, because your constituents remember if you play political games or did the finger pointing, and I think as your case proved, I mean, that only takes you so far, and it backfires on the very people doing it. I did want to touch very quickly, I know you got to go, but one thing that struck me when I was talking to House Homeland Security Chief McCall, this idea that maybe we have to reassess FEMA and funding and all the way it works into Homeland Security going forward, because obviously this could be a generational event, all of these storms, backed up like planes at LaGuardia, but that we're so focused on terror, as we should be in this country, but maybe not as much on natural disaster terror. And so we have to sort of reprioritize. What do you think?
Well, you're preaching to the choir on this one. I always believe that you should have an all-hazards approach to disasters, whether they're man-made or they're natural, because we're going to have both. And what Congress needs to do is step up to the plate and realize that FEMA has 2 buckets of money. They have their daily operational money just to do their day-to-day business. And then you have the disaster relief money, which is the money that goes to state and local governments to rebuild infrastructure to help individuals. And what Congress ought to do is get off their rear ends and understand that that disaster relief fund ought to be fully funded. And I would argue that maybe $20, $25 billion on an ongoing basis. And if that means putting in, let's say we only spend $20 billion or $5 billion in one fiscal year, and there's still 20 in there, still put another $25 billion in. Start building a rainy day fund. You and I know in the business world, we put reserves aside. Why don't we do that for the disaster relief fund? Congress, pay attention and do it.
Yeah, that's actually a very good idea. I'm going to take that as my idea now and not credit you. So,
hey,
very good job.
Have at it.
All right, Mike Brown, thank you very, very much.